Good evening, everyone. So great to see so many people here this evening. Thanks for coming to join us. Good evening and welcome to the Book Club of California's Southern California program titled Santa Monica Pier, America's Last Great Pleasure Pier. And thank you for joining us here at Pasadena Heritage and the beautiful and historic Blinn House. We love hosting our monthly meetings and presentations here, so I hope you enjoyed as much as we do. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight and host this program. For those of you that might be new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit, member and donor-supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. Now, the book club publishes finely made limited edition books, a scholarly journal that we call the Quarterly Newsletter, and keepsakes. We also host a year-round series of programs and exhibitions like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed, and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition by becoming a member. We can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. Membership dues are modest, but the benefits are many, and we'd love to have you as part of our book community. So I encourage you to visit us online at bccbooks.org to join the book club, or to donate, or to just find out more about us. And now for tonight's program and our presenter. The program is titled Santa Monica Pier, America's Last Great Pleasure Pier. And our speaker is author and historian James Harris. James Harris is a writer, host, and producer with a background in event concepts and management, facility, venue rentals, and nonprofit management. He is also the executive director of the Santa Monica Pier Corporation and the official Santa Monica Pier historian. You can tell that the Santa Monica Pier is his favorite place in the world, and as executive director of the pier and the pier historian, he loves to share his knowledge and his passion for the pier with the people of Southern California and everywhere, and that's why he's with us this evening. Tonight, Jim is going to talk about his book, Santa Monica Pier, America's Last Great Pleasure Pier. In Santa Monica Pier, Jim tells the dramatic story of survival for this Southern California icon, fighting Mother Nature, politics, and changing times. This rich history makes Santa Monica Pier more than just a landmark, more than a pleasure pier or a must-see on the West Coast. Now, for 100 years, the pier has represented the link between people and the Pacific, a connection to all that's possible, probable, and worthy of dreams. So if you have any questions about the presentation or about the pier or about our speaker, please hold those to the end of the presentation. We'll have time at the end to take questions, and we'll do that then. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, James Harris.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank all of you. The Book Club of California, right? So I've done a lot of speaking to a lot of different groups, and I always like to learn a little bit about the groups that I'm speaking to. And so when I Googled Book Club of California, I saw San Francisco. I was like, oh, great, I'm going on the road. 5.5 hour drive, 6 hour drive to San Francisco. No, I came here, and it was still a 5.5 hour drive. So, it's great to be here. It's great to be out of my car. To give you an idea of my commute to work, I live in Santa Monica. My commute to work is, in a car, probably about 10 minutes, but I walk to work every day, and it's just under an hour. And most people have an hour commute to and from their work. Mine, I'm not angry at the person in front of me. I'm not worried about the person behind me. I can text, I can email, I can call, I can do anything I want. I do have that luxury of being able to walk to, as you mentioned, my favorite place in the world, the Santa Monica Pier, and it is true. How many of you have ever been to the Santa Monica Pier? You haven't. I talked to somebody who said they've never been. You? Yes. And that's not unusual. I know Santa Monicans who haven't been to the Santa Monica Pier. You know, I know Santa Monicans who haven't been to the beach. Right? So, and that's almost unfathomable to me because I grew up in Western Colorado, and if I'm going to live in Los Angeles, I'm going to go to the beach. I'm going to go to the pier. I'm going to experience what Southern California is all about. So, as I mentioned, I grew up in Western Colorado. I started at the pier in 1989. And I was fresh out of college. I was supposed to go to law school in Kansas in 1989 and got cold feet. You know, I was a theater major, I was a writer and an actor, and law school sounded like a great idea at the time when I applied, and then all of a sudden Kansas became a reality. And I decided to take a year off. And I had an uncle that lived in Newport Beach. And this is kind of a long story I'm gonna tell, but it should tell you the impression that Santa Monica Pier got on me. So, my father's a horse veterinarian, and I didn't live with my parents at the time, but we lived in the same town. And I would go over for dinner every once in a while. Being a horse veterinarian, he had clients that would travel a long way to come for his services. So the last client of the day, he and my mother would usually invite over for dinner and give them, feed them before they go on their long journey home. I happened to come to my parents' house for dinner on the same night as the Sheffield family, which means nothing to you, I know. But they asked what I was, they started asking questions about me. What are you doing after college? I said, well, I've chosen not to go to law school. I'm going to go to California and spend a year. And the husband turns to the wife and he says, there's your new manager. And she says, oh, that's a great idea. I would love to have you work for me. I just inherited a restaurant on the Santa Monica Pier. This is the spring of 1989. And I said, no, thank you. First off, I don't want to get involved with the restaurant business. And second off, what the heck is a Santa Monica Pier? In my mind, it was the boathouse was a little tiny shanty on really a collection of sticks over the ocean that could fall in at any time. That's my visualization of the Santa Monica Pier. Didn't think about it again until September of 1989. I'm looking for a job in Orange County, living with my uncle, and college graduate, you'd think I'd find something better than telemarketing. But that's about where I was gonna go. And so, all of a sudden I get a call from Patty Sheffield saying, hey, I'm in town, I'm in Santa Monica, I would love for you to come have dinner with me. Can you come up to Santa Monica? And I said, sure, I'll come up. So I make the 1 hour drive up to Santa Monica to have dinner. I get there plenty early because traffic then was much like it is now. And I arrived early enough to where she said, oh, you're plenty early, but I'm glad you showed up early. How's the job hunt going? It's gonna be telemarketing, Patty, but I'm okay. It's gonna be good for a year. I'm gonna, figure out my life. And she says, you really, a writer and an actor, you should become a bartender. It's because bartenders have these great hours, and you can pursue your writing and acting in the hours that you're not tending bar. Plus, it's a really social thing, and I think it'd be really good for you. I was like, okay. She said, I just hired the best bartender I've ever seen. He's behind the bar right now. I would love for you to go learn from him. So I spent 2 hours learning how to tend bar from a guy from Boston who spoke so fast I couldn't understand a word he was saying. But he was a great teacher. We had a good time behind the bar, and then she came and dragged me away from the bar and said, it's time for dinner. She pulls me to a dinner table, and she didn't tell me that she was having dinner with 7 of her friends, her contemporaries. But here we are at a table that has 7 placemats in front of it, branded paper placemats, and 8 seats. She sits me in the seat that has no placemat. And then she asked what I thought of tending bar. I said, I really enjoyed this, I could do it. And she said, okay, this is the last time I'm ever going to offer you a job. And she pulls out the other placemat, and on the back of it, the blank side, is a schedule. And I've been on the Santa Monica Pier ever since that September 1990. So the Santa Monica Pier means a lot to me. It became home right away. Santa Monica Pier at that time, about 2 million visitors a year, which seems like a big number until you think about the fact that it's a summer destination, and the bulk of the visitors were really using the pier as a bridge to get to the beach. Because if you remember the pier in September of 1989, or the 1980s at all, there was no West End. It had been torn down by storms. It was not a great area. It was not the pier. There was no amusement park. It was not the pier that has become so popular today. So of those 2 million visitors, the bulk of that were the summer tourists, and they were gone. 2 months and they were gone. When I started, they weren't coming. It was September. We had homeless. We had a lot of gang activity. One of my first Saturday nights, I had to make the 911 call for a shooting right outside the boathouse. But we had a fourth demographic, besides the tourists, the homeless, and the gangs. We had these people who had been coming down to the pier all their lives, and it was just what they did. It was part of their routine. And they would come in, and I was not a stupid bartender. I learned right away that the best way to make a buck was to listen to people, right? And so they would sit down at the bar and over coffee or over a cocktail, tell me the most wonderful stories of what the Santa Monica Pier used to be. And I fell in love. That was the place that I suddenly wanted to be and learn more about. And so I did. Here I am, almost 35 years later. I'm the executive director of the Santa Monica Pier Corporation, something I never thought that I would be in my life. I've produced some amazing events there, and I've written a couple of books now. This is the second edition of the original Pier History book. The first was to celebrate the centennial of the pier in 2009. And you would think that that's enough, right? Why would you want to do a second edition? Has that many great things happened in the last 15 years? That's debatable. But what I learned after writing the first edition of the history book was, while I thought I had the complete history, comprehensive history, and it's a really great book, that first edition. All of a sudden, people started coming up to me with their own stories, kind of out of the woodwork. Did you know this about the pier? Because now I'm the pier historian. I'm the one that the expert, right? Did you know this about the pier? Did you know that the first ever public paddleboard club and paddleboard racing started at the pier? Did you know that Walter Hobbs held his? Actually, it wasn't even. Did you know? Somebody walked into my office and said, "Is it true that Walter Hobbs curated his first ever art show inside the merry-go-round building in 1955? And I had to get the blank look of, no, I didn't, which is tough when you're a historian. But I got to learn all these wonderful stories since then. And so for 15 years, the original book has felt incomplete. And now, with this second edition, I think I can comfortably say that we have a comprehensive history of the Santa Monica Pier. I'm going to give one little footnote, though. No sooner did the book go to print for this second edition than there was a gentleman waiting outside my office, and my office is above the merry-go-round, which used to be apartments. Now they're offices. And he says, I'm going to tell you something you didn't know about this place. Because of course, right, the book just went to print. He said, there was a very famous playwright that used your office as writing space. And I'm ready for him. I'm thinking, yep, I know, William Saroyan. No, not William Saroyan, but it's true, William Saroyan did use it. Tennessee Williams. Where were you 15 years ago? So that's my story and the life that I live. And I'm very proud of the life that I live and the time that I've had with the pier. But we're not here to talk about me, we're here to talk about that Santa Monica Pier. So, without further ado, as they say, I'm going to tell you the story a shorter version of the story than I probably could, because I could keep you here for days, of the Santa Monica Pier. The Santa Monica Pier opened on September 9th, 1909, and this is what it looked like on opening day. Now that's not at all like the picture that you saw before that was the cover of the book, right? There is no amusement park. There are no buildings upon it, no businesses. It's just a long pier that goes out over the ocean. 1,600 feet long, actually. Pardon?
What was that date again?
September 9th, 1909. If you write it numerically, it's 9909.
Okay.
It works great with school kids. But I might test you on it later. But you can see a lot of people here on opening day, September 9th, 1909, celebrating a pier that was actually built to run sewage out into the ocean. Which seems odd, right? But the Santa Monica Pier was built as a solution to accumulating sewage. It was built by the city of Santa Monica as a public utility to run treated sewage out into the ocean through a pipe underneath where all these people are standing. So why are all these people standing here on a sewer pier? would you? It was the first pier on the West Coast made entirely of concrete, and the second in the United States and in the world altogether. So it was a technological marvel for the time, all right? So that's something to celebrate, right? And so the city of Santa Monica did celebrate. They had a parade, they had a state senator come and give speeches, they had George Freeth. I don't know if you're familiar with George Freeth, the man who introduced surfing to the coastal United, or to the mainland United States. He participated in some races and judged some others. They had a fireworks show, and they had a play, a tableau vivant, which is like a stop motion play that told the story of King Neptune coming in to destroy the pier, because that's what Neptune did, was destroy all the piers. And Lady Santa Monica stepping in front of King Neptune before he's going to destroy the pier and saying, this one's made of concrete. Whereupon King Neptune admitted his defeat, dived into the ocean. I'm still trying to picture this, I've only read it. And then all of a sudden the fireworks show starts. So a great fanfare, right? Lasted about a day, and then you had your concrete pier to run sewage out into the ocean. And the citizens of Santa Monica realized that they had something a little bit insufficient. A mile to the south was Ocean Park Pier, and a couple more miles south of that, the Venice Pier, both with great amusement parks. So there was a group of people that wanted an amusement park pier right away. There was a group of people that wanted a yacht harbor. And if you've ever seen that iconic arched blue sign that everybody calls the pier sign, it says Santa Monica Yacht Harbor, not Santa Monica Pier. So the citizens of Santa Monica from day one had bigger aspirations from their pier, and ultimately got what they wanted, each group. I'm gonna go to this slide next, and I got a little ahead of myself, but back to those people who came out of the woodwork. The people who came out of the woodwork, no sooner did I write the book that I got these people coming to me with pier stories. This is a medallion from September 9th, 1909, 9909. I have a couple of these in my office now from people who have found me, celebrating that great fanfare. It's about the size of a $50, but it's a pretty cool little coin. Not in the first edition of the book. So if you pick up tonight's edition, you're going to see a nice photograph of that. The people who wanted an amusement park were the first to see some success in their dreams. In stepped a man named Charles I.D. Loof. Have you ever heard of Charles Loof?
No.
Have you ever heard of Loof Carousel? Okay. Charles Loof carved the first two carousels at Coney Island, and then became an amusement park entrepreneur and built amusement parks featuring his carousels all across the United States.
Wow.
He passed away in 1918. His last project before passing away was at Santa Monica Pier. He also started Santa Cruz Pier, and you can actually ride a Loof Carousel at Santa Cruz, not Piers, Beach Boardwalk now. But he was attracted to Santa Monica because of all the transportation offerings. The train came right to where the Santa Monica Pier was. There was a tram, a beach tram. It was very easily accessible. So he was immediately attracted and built a wooden pier immediately adjacent to the concrete pier on the south side and attached it to the Santa Monica Municipal Pier. So that is where the pier originally got its very distinct shape. You have the long part that goes out over the ocean, which was originally the concrete pier, the 1,600-foot pier that the city always owned, and then you have the wide part that has the amusements on it. So Santa Monica Pier is actually two piers. Here you can see the Last Pleasure Pier. This is in about 1917, and right in the center, of course, is the Loof Hippodrome, which everybody calls the Carousel building or the merry-go-round building if you've been to the pier. Why? Because it has a carousel inside, right? Originally, Charles Loof's Carousel. However, that carousel only remained on the pier until 1939 when a bank took over the property from the leaseholders at the time and sold it because it was the only thing of value. And they sold it to Belmont Park in San Diego, and that carousel remained there until 1976 and was parted out, meaning sold horse by horse, and those horses are all over the world. In 2009, one of those horses just happened to come up on eBay for sale for $20,000. We didn't buy it. I asked for them to donate it, but they never answered me. But those horses, Loof Carousel horses, are very treasured. He's one of the most iconic carousel carvers ever. The building, however, still remains. We have a carousel inside it. It's a 1922 Philadelphia Toboggan Company carousel. It's been inside the building since 1947. And those horses that people ride today are the same hand-carved wooden horses from 1922. They're 102 years old. So when people ride that carousel today, they're riding a genuine antique, which is really special. And few people know that that's how special a ride they're getting, but that's pretty darn cool, right? The building itself is a national landmark. It was entered into the National Registry of Historic Places in 1987 as the last representation of the funky, unique architecture that used to be all along Santa Monica Bay with all the pleasure piers that have all disappeared. This one, because of its proximity to a city property, and we'll get into that later, but that's not it. We'll get into that later. Is the last one of those architectural gems remaining. The only thing that's really close to similar in the Santa Monica Venice area is Windward Avenue and the buildings with the arches. It's the only other building that's reminiscent of a different time. You can see a wooden roller coaster here. You can see this thrill ride, which I'm sure would not be allowed today. It is boats. Those are large boats on the end which carry about 20 people each. Probably no seat belts, and they go swinging around. But what a fun pier. And so you still see the concrete pier alongside. So you can see two distinct piers. As I mentioned, Charles passed away in 1918, and his son took over operations, Arthur Loof. But Arthur was very focused on Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk. The wooden roller coaster there, that's Arthur Loof's. So you have a father and son thing at Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, which is pretty cool. So Arthur sold the property, sold the lease to a group of Santa Monica realtors who were very happy to have an amusement park pier to compete with the Ocean Park Pier to the south and the Venice Pier even further south. But it was small compared to those two, and they wanted to have something larger and more distinct. They replaced the roller coaster with a more thrilling roller coaster called the Whirlwind Dipper. But their biggest achievement was extending the pier another few hundred feet, and we just had to and there, and building the La Monica Ballroom. Billed at the time as the largest ballroom in the world. This is in 1924, summer of 1924. It had the most spacious dance floor. It had that unique architecture that that we just don't see anymore, resembling a castle floating over the ocean. If you have an idea of the pier, if you can visualize, and you saw it in the beginning, where the amusement park is today, that entire footprint was where the ballroom was in 1924 through 1962. Huge ballroom. The build-up to the opening of the La Monica Ballroom was so great that it drew a reported 50,000 people on opening day. That's a lot of people, and I can tell you from producing those big concerts at the pier, we never saw 50,000 people. We saw maybe throughout the entire evening 30 or 40. So 50,000 in my mind is unfathomable. But regardless of how many people were really there, the date that it opened in 1924, in August of 1924, is on record as the first ever recorded traffic jam in Santa Monica. See, I had a great punchline. I'm glad you all got to laugh at it. Traffic jams are every day, everywhere now, but this was Santa Monica's first recorded traffic jam, the opening of the ballroom. The timing of the opening of the ballroom was unfortunate. That winter, storms rocked the pier and actually did a lot of damage to the substructure of the pier, and they had to close the pier and replace the floor and replace the substructure, not the pier, the ballroom. And so they had to close it throughout the winter, had a late opening during the summer, and then just a few years after that came the Great Depression. And of course the Great Depression had huge impacts everywhere, had a tremendous impact on the Santa Monica Pier. The ballroom throughout the Great Depression ended up being leased by the city. So if you can imagine, there's the pier, there's a lessee on the pier leasing property from the city of Santa Monica, and then the city leases this ballroom back from the lessee to use as a convention center and for living space. The Santa Monica lifeguards ended up having an aquarium in the ballroom. We're having a lot of fun with this. Well, we'll do it here. If it changes again, let me know. By 1930, all of the thrill rides, the roller coasters and everything gone, and that became parking lot because it's the Great Depression and people weren't able to do luxury spending and amusement spending. In the ballroom, they had the dance marathons, which have you ever seen? They shoot horses, don't they? Or read the book, right? That's set in the Monica Ballroom. They don't call it that in the book, but that's exactly what it's inspired by. People literally dancing until they dropped, hoping to gain financial reward. So the Great Depression put an end to really the fun of the pier, but what it did also was open the door for the other group of people who wanted something specific for the Santa Monica Pier, and that was Santa Monica Yacht Harbor. A public works project was proposed by the city of Santa Monica for the voters to approve, and to build a breakwater and create a yacht harbor. The idea being that building the breakwater would create jobs for Santa Monicans, and the yacht harbor would bring income opportunities for Santa Monica. So one door closes, another door opens. The breakwater was supposed to be built of concrete, and the pier extended as a bridge out to this concrete breakwater where people could actually have walked on the breakwater, fished off the breakwater, which was a very exciting thing and helped sell the proposition to voters. No sooner did they take the first crib, the first section, like a giant brick, if you will, and set that out 300 feet off of the end of the pier, then it cracked. Right? Heartbreaking, right? Santa Monica, the city of Santa Monica realized they had a big problem on their hands. They invited in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for advice, and the Army Corps of Engineers said, well, you can still build a breakwater, but forget this concrete idea. Just bring in rocks from Catalina and build a rock mound breakwater. You can still have your yacht harbor. You can't do your bridge idea, but you can still have your yacht harbor and some mooring space in that. So Santa Monica finished up the job with building a rock mound breakwater, and here you can see this day before opening, a publicity shot with young ladies, probably not enjoying what they're walking on so much, but really making the best of the moment. and the barge there, which was used for construction. And they opened Santa Monica Yacht Harbor in August of 1934. And among the first to purchase a mooring at Santa Monica Yacht Harbor was Charlie Chaplin. Charlie had a beach house right next to the pier. He was very close to Marion Davies, who had the great estate that Hearst built for her just north of the pier. And Charlie had always had an attachment to the pier, and especially to the yacht harbor. And there's a lot, if you read newspaper articles from the time, there's always a Charlie Chaplin mention. He was a sailor too, right? he was a yacht aficionado. And just keep getting ahead of ourselves. Anyway, but yeah, okay. So you can see here what the rock mound breakwater looked like. This is actually from the 1950s, and the boats in the yacht harbor. That massive ballroom. I wasn't kidding by how big it was, right? It's like a huge castle floating over the ocean, if you can imagine. And unfortunately, by 1962, it just wasn't well taken care of, and it was collapsing and torn down. It became a parking lot until it became Pacific Park. But we're going to argue all night, aren't we?
Well, this went up. This thing helped.
I don't know.
Do you want me to click for you? But you might be
Would
at
it
a
work
weird
better
angle
for you?
trying to get to the.
Okay. I wanted to get back to this.
How do I get back to this? Tell me when you want to go forward.
Okay, thank you. I called ahead and it said it was going to agree with me.
Want to go one more?
No, it's fine. Santa Monica Yacht Harbor. This sign was installed in the summer of 1941 because there was a massive highway project for bringing the Coast Highway up into Santa Monica. Today it meets with the 10, so this was the beginning of a project that ended up with the 10 freeway many years later. But to get access from the Coast Highway up into Santa Monica and vice versa. And so this bridge was built, the bridge that we all know today. And suddenly people couldn't figure out, because the bridge obscured the view of the rest of the pier, people really couldn't figure out, well, is that the way to get down onto the pier or not? At least that's the story in the paper. I can't really imagine that people couldn't figure that out. But the pier businesses pooled their money together and actually had Santa Monica High School students design this sign, which has now become an iconic sign. It's not a national landmark, it is a state landmark. This neon sign that says Santa Monica Yacht Harbor, Sport, Fishing, Boating, and Cafes. This is the unveiling of that sign in June of 1941. Some very distinct characters here. There are the three Santa Monica commissioners, including the mayor in the middle, a couple of B actresses right beside them for the publicity shot. And if we go to the right, the man in the striped tie, that's the man who was behind the whole project to get the sign put up. His name was Dick Hernage. And if we come over to the left, a little farther, the guy in the white hat, Cap Watkins, one of the founders of the Santa Monica and Venice lifeguard forces, and a longtime captain of the Santa Monica Lifeguards. And just to the right of him, a man named Olaf Olson, who you just saw a picture of, and I can't really give you the punchline now. He was the inspiration for the character Popeye. So some really great characters in this photo. And now you can click ahead. So the yacht harbor in the 1950s, out in the distance is the USS Saratoga, which used to come every 4th of July, or sometimes in May for Navy Day. And sailors would come visit Santa Monica. Santa Monicans or Angelinos or whoever would also, in return, go out and visit the aircraft carrier. But this was life in the harbor back in the 1950s. Next. And here's the punchline. So Olaf Olson, when I was researching for the first edition of the book, I kept through the evening outlooks, and I had to read every single, pretty much article in every single evening outlook because it was not indexed back, 15, 16 years ago. So, yeah. And so I was learning all about this guy named Olaf Olson, who was running fishing operations. There was the story of how he was a Norwegian immigrant. His real last name was Krogh, but the clerk for immigration, when his family tried to register, could not spell Krogh, so he said, "Oh, all you Norwegians are named Olson, so your name is Olson now." He was a career sailor in the Navy. Then when he retired from the Navy, he came to Santa Monica, fell in love with the fishing boat operations that were happening around the Santa Monica Pier, and started operating his own fleet of fishing boats from the pier, and ultimately taking over all fishing operations from the end of the pier. During his later years, a man named L.Z. Seagar moved to Santa Monica from Illinois by way of New York, and he was while in New York, he became a very famous cartoonist, famous for the strip, the Thimble Theater. Anyone familiar with the Thimble Theater? This is the strip that had olive oil, castor oil, ham gravy, and them telling their stories, all based upon people that L.Z. Seagar knew in Illinois. For his health, Seagar moved to Santa Monica, had an office on 4th and Broadway in Santa Monica, and every day he and his assistant would walk down to the end of the Santa Monica Pier, rent a rowboat from Olaf Olson, and discuss story ideas right off of the pier in their rowboat. One day they decided to take the Thimble Theater family to Dice Island, which is basically Catalina, and they needed a fishing boat and an interesting captain to get them there. So they chose the most interesting looking of the fishing boat captains, a very distinct look, with the sailor's hat and corncob pipe with bulgy arms, and created the character Popeye. Now, we say physical model for Popeye, and I stick to that because as I was learning about Olaf Olsen, I finally came to his obituary, which was heartbreaking, by the way. You know, you're learning, you're kind of living this guy's life with a lot of the characters that I got to learn throughout the process of researching the book. And then you get to their obituary, and it's like, oh man, I wanted more, right? And the very last line of Olaf Olsen's obituary in the LA Times says he was also the physical model for Popeye. The physical model for Popeye. So I mentioned that Seagar based all of his characters on people that he grew up with and knew in Illinois. And there's a man named Rocky Fiedler that's who the character of Popeye is reportedly based upon. But it's impossible to argue that this is not the physical inspiration for the character of Popeye when you know the story of how they got there in the first place. So, next slide, please. The Santa Monica lifeguards. Probably the most innovative and influential lifeguard force ever. And I get that from lifeguards, from longtime lifeguards, retired lifeguards, who knew and understood their work. They were not the original lifeguard force, but they were one of the early lifeguard forces. It was actually George Freeth, who I mentioned earlier, who was the first real lifeguard, dedicated lifeguard, and he did most of his work in Redondo and Venice. But the Santa Monica lifeguards were hugely influential in that they were working on technique beyond just the ability to swim and save people. They were working on the tools to help them do that better. Are you familiar with the orange tube that you've seen? Of course, the orange foam tube that you've seen at every swimming pool, every lakeside. You wrap it around someone and clasp it. It's called a Peterson tube. And it was invented by Santa Monica lifeguard Pete Peterson, who's in this photo, I believe. Let's see, where is he in this? Yep, there he is right there. Stop. No, not that one. This one right here. Pete Peterson, considered to be the greatest waterman of all time. Those stories of Pete Peterson alone, I could have written a book on, and I'd be afraid to because there are so many people that know those stories better than I do. But Pete Peterson was a highly respected swimmer, surfer, paddleboarder, free diver, scuba diver, boat craftsman, boat repair. There was nothing to do with the water that he couldn't do. The movie Jaws, he was the top stunt coordinator for that. There was a story about Pete Peterson that he was out with a couple of guys out fishing in the ocean, and their boat began to take on water from a hole in the front of the boat. And immediately you're thinking, well, the boat's going to sink, right? You know, you're miles out, away from the pier, away from the beach. We're sunk, we're going to swim. He punched a hole in the back of the boat and then turned the engine on and had that boat run at full speed so that the water would run from the front of the boat where the hole was, the hole where the leak was, and go out the back. You know, that genius of a person. He just knew how to work in the water. We have an award that we have a paddleboard race at the pier every year, along with swimming races. It's coming up in a couple of weeks, our Pier 360 Beach Festival, and we give out the Pete Peterson Award to the top most inspirational male athlete of the day. We give one out for the top female also, which should be the next slide. Yes, this young lady here. Dorothy Hawkins, Dottie Hawkins. So this is on the Manoa Paddleboard Club, the first ever public paddleboard club. And you know, public, to say that really probably doesn't mean a lot until you know the story of why there was a public paddleboard club that was headquartered at the Santa Monica Pier. So paddleboarding was introduced to the mainland United States via the Santa Monica Lifeguards, the innovative force, by Tom Blake, whom you've probably never heard of. Right? Has anybody heard of Tom Blake? You're a surfer in the back, aren't you? Yeah. So Tom Blake was raised in the Midwest. He went to Hawaii and discovered surfing. You know, and this is back in the 1920s, 1930s, on the solid wooden boards that the Hawaiians were using. And he fell in love with the sport, but thought, this is ridiculous that you guys are using these 90-pound boards. You know, how can we make these lighter? So he invented the hollow surfboard and the hollow paddleboard, which was basically, you know, still wooden boards, but constructed such that you didn't need all the weight of the solid board. So he invented the hollow paddleboard, and he brought his design to Los Angeles and introduced his paddleboard here to the Santa Monica lifeguards, and became a temporary for a short time, became a Santa Monica lifeguard while he was waiting for his patented product to be built and manufactured and for the public to enjoy, and by the Rogers Company in Venice. So he's with Santa Monica lifeguards. People are seeing at the Santa Monica Pier, the Santa Monica lifeguards with this new toy, this new life-saving tool that looks like a toy, and next to the pier are all these private paddleboard clubs. Not paddleboard clubs, private athletic clubs, the beach clubs. You know, the Jonathan Club is still here today, but the Santa Monica Athletic Club and several others, and they see these boards and think, wow, this is something we have to have. They were the first to purchase those Rogers boards when they became available. And they started paddleboard racing at the Santa Monica Pier. First ever paddleboard races were held at the Santa Monica Pier. Now, Dottie Hawkins, where does she come in? Dottie, when she was about 8, 9 years old, would come to the pier with her father after school every day. He would pick her up on his motorcycle and her pet duck in the back. And he would go work out at Muscle Beach, and then afterward, he would play with his daughter at the beach. There were paddleboard rentals just north of the pier on the beach, and they decided to try out these paddleboards and see, you know, how much fun they could have on a paddleboard in the yacht harbor. And he discovered that 9-year-old Dottie was really proficient on one of these paddleboards, which 60, 70 pounds still, you know. Not the 90-pound boards in Hawaii, but still a pretty heavy board. But I saw she was really proficient, entered her in a race at Bionah Creek against adults, and she took 3rd place. So then he thinks, I've got I've got a progeny here. What can I do with this kid? I can't afford to enter her into any of the private athletic clubs. You know, we just don't make that kind of money. Well, he had befriended Cap Watkins, who you saw in the photo with the sign, and also the Santa Monica lifeguards. And Cap Watkins helped his buddy out and gave him some storage space at the west end of the Santa Monica Pier and said, why don't you just open up your own club here? And you can, you know, if you can get some paddle boards, you can rent those out and make it available to the public. Everybody should be able to enjoy this. And so he did. Ed Hawkins opened up the Manoa Paddleboard Club, originally called Huey Maioki, which is a tongue twister, and then renamed the Manoa Paddleboard Club, featuring, you know, all built around his daughter, Dottie. And that club then entered races against the private clubs. And Dottie, in all of her racing career, never finished less than 1st place for the rest of her life. She was that great of a performer. They invented paddleboard water polo, which is not a sport today, but if you can imagine, they're in the yacht harbor playing water polo, right? Suddenly, the Santa Monica Pier is becoming very interesting in the 1940s because you're seeing this activity with paddleboards, and you have this yacht harbor. You see paddleboard water polo, and the women put together a paddleboard water ballet team, which is like synchronized swimming on paddleboards. It became such a popular spectacle there that Buster Crabbe came along and collected the Manoa Paddleboard Ballet into his own traveling water show, and they traveled the world, you know, with these water ballet shows. This is Dottie at about age, I think she's about 15 there. And the board that she has, there were 3 of them. Oh, this is great, I didn't even notice this before. So it has, that board has her name on it. That's not even a wooden paddle board. It's the skeleton of it, the frame of it is made of wood, but it's a vinyl paddle board. And there were 3 made, one for Dorothy, one for Tommy Zahn, and one for Johnny Weissmuller. So that name rings a bell, right? Tarzan. So Johnny Weissmuller was a big part of the activity at the pier in these days. An honorary Santa Monica lifeguard, awarded by the lifeguards. Actually made a few rescues. You can learn about those in the book. and also a member of the Manoa Paddleboard Club, and become such good friends with Dottie that every time he needed to get in shape for a Tarzan movie, he would call on Dottie and say, let's go work out, I need to get in shape. And so they would go out and paddle together. Now paddleboarding today, they use an oar, right? A paddle. But back then it was a prone. You were on board, basically swimming on top of the board. So it's a good way to get in shape. Next slide, please. There's Johnny Weismuller. That is not his final board, but on a paddleboard, pretending to surf. This is a publicity shot. You can't really, he probably was off the board just moments after that. But it's a great photo of Johnny in Santa Monica Yacht Harbor. You see the pier in the background. To give you an idea, the Manoa Paddleboard Club would have been right up in the right corner there where you kind of see it at the second level floor fishing deck. So, next slide, please. What else have I got? Oh, it's no better for you than it is me.
Are there more slides?
Yes. I think it's probably, they're big images.
There we go.
Okay. So we had the heyday in the 1940s of the pier. And you know, we're in our second heyday today. The pier's more popular than ever now. But really in the 1940s, just after the Second World War, and with all that activity going on, it was a really great place to be. Spade Cooley played in the Monica Ballroom.
Saturday night.
Saturday night. You know how many audiences that I say the name Spade Cooley and they look at me blank? But he was one of the most popular musicians of his time in the 1940s. And his show, he had a weekly show, Saturday night, in the Monica Ballroom. So popular that in 1948,
Yeah.
KTLA was so intrigued by his show that they broadcast his show live from the Monica Ballroom, and it was the first ever broadcast of a TV variety show anywhere. The Monica Ballroom, Santa Monica Pier. Because Spade Cooley was, one of the most popular of its time. More popular than Desi Arnaz or Lawrence Welk or any of his contemporaries. Yeah. Would you like to share why the people probably don't remember him?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was so young. I watched every Saturday night I watched it.
So Spade knew he was something special, and he moved out of the ballroom and into a TV studio and was making the most of his fame and fortune, and his ego got a little ahead of him, and he ended up arguing too much with producers, and his show was canceled. Not long after that, he murdered his wife.
Oh.
So
Spoiled my image.
Yeah, he murdered his wife, and he did time for murdering his wife. He actually did get out of prison on good behavior in his later years, and played one show and had a heart attack right after the show. But yeah, pretty sorry story. You never hear that about Desi Arnaz or Lawrence Welk. You may hear some other things, but yeah, murder. That's probably why you haven't heard of Spade Cooley. But
He was in the good days.
great to have someone in the audience.
It was much better.
So, moving on into the 1950s and the 1960s, the pier was not enjoying the popularity and fanfare that it had in the 1940s. It was also getting pretty run down. And the city, the concrete pier had been replaced by wood after its first 10 years. The concrete just did not hold up. They used beach sand to build the piles, for one thing. So the concrete pier had given way to a wooden pier, 1,600 feet out over the ocean. And the least part of the pier was not very well cared for either. So the pier was getting really run down, and the city was trying to figure out what to do with it. What can we do to make the pier more viable? And there were ideas like using the pier as part of a causeway, a series of islands, and replacing the coast highway instead with a highway that went over islands from Santa Monica to Malibu. That didn't get very far, but it was actually something that the state of California was interested in for some time. After that died down, the city of Santa Monica was still trying to figure out what to do, and the city council charged their city manager, a man named Perry Scott, with find a way to make the pier more viable. This is your number one task. So he did. He came back with the concept of building a man-made island by bringing more rocks in to build on top of the rock mound breakwater, to build this man-made island with a convention center and a resort hotel and a lot of fine amenities. Extend the pier as a bridge to this Santa Monica Island. And the city council said, that's great. Let's put it before the voters and see if we can get this paid for. Well, the voters weren't having any of that. Here, you know, the Venice Pier that I mentioned earlier, a few miles south of the Santa Monica Pier, that was gone by 1947. Privately owned, torn down, bankrupt and torn down. The Ocean Park Pier, just a mile south, became POP, was very successful for the late 50s and into the mid-1960s, but Disneyland pretty much put them out of business by 1968. Santa Monica Pier, and it was decaying in the late 60s and 1970s, if you know the story. If you've ever seen the documentary about the Z-Boys, Dogtown Z-Boys, and that was the cove where they surfed in. Tremendously dangerous area, it was always catching fire. An easy place to get hurt until the city finally removed all that structure. But the Santa Monica Pier was the last one of the three big ones standing. And so the community was not gonna have an island, out there changing the whole atmosphere. And an island built for rich people, quite frankly, that's what it was. And the pier was just not a rich people's place. Are you familiar with the Hilton Hotel that became the Wyndham, that became now the Pierside Hotel? It's on 2nd in Colorado. And for me, when I talk to Santa Monicans, they get it right away. But it is a hotel built on 2nd in Colorado, just a couple blocks away from the pier. Not a single window faces the pier, because the pier was considered an eyesore when it was built. So the windows all face north and south, nothing toward the ocean. It's unbelievable, and then people wonder about that all the time. But that's the reason, because the pier was that much of a blight that the city was ashamed of it, and the contractors as well. So Perry Scott's idea failed. The voters rejected in the late 1960s Santa Monica Island, but Perry Scott was not to be deterred. He went out and found a developer who would come in and pay for it all. And for that, you didn't need the voters' approval. All you needed was the city council's approval. So Perry Scott comes back with his plan and somebody to pay for his plan. And the city council's like, well, you solved our problem. So unanimously, we have a 7-member city council, have forever, except for when it was just the 3 guys there. But 6 city council members were present, passed it unanimously to go ahead with the development of this island. In the developer's proposal, the Santa Monica Pier was to be demolished and replaced with a conventional bridge. Now you can imagine what this did to a community who already rejected the island. Now you're going to force this island upon us, and you're going to take away the Santa Monica Pier? So the community rebelled. And when I'm talking about the community, the people who gathered together, who assembled and organized to fight City Hall, I'm talking about fishermen and fisherwomen, bumper car operators, bartenders, waiters, waitresses, surfers, kids who were learning how to surf in the yacht harbor, in the pacified water, adults, children, people who ordinarily wouldn't have the wherewithal, the guts to fight City Hall because it's unfathomable, right? But the Santa Monica Pier at this time, while it was run down, also had a very bohemian kind of culture to it. And a lot of artists and activists were hanging out at the pier. And among those, and I'm just going to throw out some bigger names, although they weren't the bigger players, Tom Hayden, Jane Fonda, Joan Baez, right? You have these people inspiring the people who work there and really are engaged with the pier, and suddenly you have an organized movement. And so the community organized, and it was a hard fight. They lost at 2 subsequent city council meetings where they protested the island and the pier being torn down. Ultimately, someone realized, and nobody was really know who thought of it first, but it was an election year, and 3 city council members were up for re-election. And so they came up with their own candidates, the community, and made it very clear that the 3 candidates who were up for re-election were in danger. And ultimately, those candidates felt the pressure, changed their vote, along with the rest of the city council members, changed their vote. And then there were other factors. There were, people were out getting environmental reports and all of this, and then really building up their ammunition. It was a very well-organized effort. But the council members changed their vote and saved the pier. They didn't save their jobs, though. Of the 6 city council members who voted to tear down the pier, 5 failed in their re-election bids, and 1 passed away in office. So not a single person who voted to tear down the pier ever got a term after that vote. Pretty powerful movement. Now, if you know Santa Monica politics, this kind of paved the way for the renters' rights movement and the political party that we have in charge of Santa Monica now. Part of the campaign, this is an actual wall outside the merry-go-round building, Save the Pier. Every year we have a play that we produce on the pier called Save the Pier, and it's a melodramatic telling of the community and those very special characters who fought City Hall against a city council and city manager who just didn't quite understand how much that pier still meant to that community. I wrote it. Next slide, please. Now the pier had been saved and then landmarked. In 1975, the pier was landmarked, which meant that, and in the proposition to landmark the pier, it's specifically stated that the pier cannot be torn down or significantly altered without a vote of the people, meaning the city council couldn't touch it, the city staff couldn't touch it. It was if you're going to alter the pier, it has to be on the ballot. And so the pier still had a lot of character to it, and a lot of people remember these restaurants. I put up this cocktail napkin. Do anyone remember? Moby's Dock, Sinbad's, that great big red building, right? So it had all this character still to it, but it was still a problem. There's another slide here. The bumper car booth, which was, I show this because the 2 people in this are somewhat famous people. One is Pat Lennon, he's the shirtless guy, who you probably don't know as Pat Lennon, but you may know the band Venice. Have you ever heard of the band Venice? They're big in Europe, but there was some. And the other one, Todd Bessie, was the founder of Slash magazine, a punk rock magazine. And they were tasked by Maynard Ostro, the man who ran the bumper cars, owned the bumper cars, to paint this booth, the ticket booth. And every time it was finished, it wasn't good enough. So they had to repaint it and repaint it. And this is, maybe the 15th different paint job. But I love that because that's just kind of the character of, those are the kind of characters that you saw on the pier. And that's the booth, I think, really demonstrates the character of the pier. During this period in the 1970s, when the pier had been saved, but it was still not viable. It was a place that had a lot of character, but the city was still pouring a lot of money into it. The visitorship was not great, but it was landmarked. It wasn't going anywhere. There was a task force put together to reimagine the Santa Monica Pier and what can we do to make it more viable. But when you have a bunch of leaseholds, that are long-term leaseholds, there's not a lot you can do. There's no place to build anything new. You had to figure out what to do with what you had. Next slide, please. 10 years later, Mother Nature had some ideas of her own. And it was an El Nino year. And on January 27th, 1983, there were 10-foot seas reported to be coming toward Santa Monica Beach and Santa Monica Pier. The lower fishing deck at the west end of the Santa Monica Pier was 8 feet above mean high tide, meaning something's going to give. And the community, a lot of people from the community actually took off work. I've talked to people who took off work for the day to go stand on top of the Palisades Park and brave the sleet and wind that was coming in with that storm to see what was going to happen to the end of the Santa Monica Pier. And sure enough, that lower fishing deck was wiped out. This is not that storm. But the lower fishing deck was wiped out. The Santa Monica city manager at the time, a man named John Alschuler, in the press, wasted no time and said, "Don't worry, we will rebuild." And so days later, they hire a contractor. The contractor takes a crane out to the end of the pier, which was still standing, and to clean up the damage of the lower fishing deck that had been wiped out. Another storm on March 1st, another storm equal size comes in, and that crane's still out at the end of the pier. and it knocked the crane into the water, and the crane acted as a battering ram, and that's what caused all this damage. The entire west end is gone, as well as about a third of the overall surface of the pier. So a devastating storm, which was a disaster when it happened, right? But it also had a silver lining, and that it now gave the city of Santa Monica a clean slate to work with. You can reimagine what's on the pier. With the, Moby's dock was removed, and all that area now is where they built, the city put out for bid an opportunity for an amusement park. I'm bringing back the first full-scale amusement park since 1930. Remember, I said 1930, as a result of the Great Depression, the original amusement park disappeared. So for 66 years, we did not have a full-time amusement park. There were some traveling carnivals that came through. 1996, go ahead to the next slide, please.
Wow.
We're getting to the point here, this is actually 1989, and I'm back there in this, I'm back in there tending bar. That's what the pier looked like then. And then next slide.
Come on, you can do it.
Yeah.
Think positive. Think positive.
Good, okay. So we have the amusement park. We have fine dining out at the west end, family-friendly fine dining, but family-friendly being the key component there. Reimagining the pier as being family-friendly. That storm, the March 1st, 1983 storm, gave the city the opportunity to finally find a way to make the pier more viable. And that's how we've come up with the Santa Monica Pier as it is today. In the meantime, there, in the 1980s, a lot of people thought the Santa Monica Pier was closed. And I had lunch today with the producer of Cirque du Soleil. And we were talking about the impact that Cirque du Soleil had when they came in 1987 on the parking lot just north of the pier, and helped people to realize the Santa Monica Pier was being rebuilt, and it was open and operating. In 1985, just a couple years before Cirque du Soleil, the first of the Twilight Dance Series concerts, which we ran for 35 years. Everybody called them the summer concerts at the pier. Inspiration for free concerts everywhere. A lot of municipalities have free concerts now. Ours got too big and a little unsafe. But those were specifically produced to draw people to the pier and see that there are big changes coming, big positive changes coming, and that it was still open. And then by 1996, of course, we have the opening of Pacific Park. And, we get to the pier. I mentioned when I started in 1989, 2 million visitors a year. The estimated numbers today, and there hasn't been any kind of account since before the pandemic, but the estimates today are between 11 and 14 million visitors a year. So, our 2 million visitors we had mostly just during the summer in 1989, and that's when the pier was busy. If the sun's out today, if the sun's out on January 27th of 2024, the pier is packed, just like it is a summer day. It's that popular, and the change in the atmosphere that was brought forth as a result of those storms has had that tremendous impact on the Santa Monica Pier. And you saw what it looked like when I started, that metal structure alongside the pier as the pier was being rebuilt. It's kind of like we grew up together. It's been a pleasure. So I started off by talking about my attachment to the pier just from hearing those stories, but that attachment has only grown more and more and inspired me to write not just the first book, but this book, which I feel really tells the comprehensive and best story of the Santa Monica Pier. And I think with that,
No more slides?
I don't think so. Let's see.
Let's see.
I have a couple different
Let's
versions.
see if we can. Okay.
Yeah.
At least it worked for the last slide.
It was perfect.
Great.
Yes.
Well, let's
you.
take a couple of questions. We have some time, so why don't we take some questions? Susan?
Well, this is a story, because I grew up very close to that. If you look up on the right-hand side, you'll see a tall building. Well, I grew up in Santa Monica Canyon, which is
Sure.
right there, okay? So I did like Spade Cooley and all of that, but after high school, my first boyfriend's parents owned an apartment around the merry-go-round, which was an incredible experience. I think I was more enamored with the merry-go-round than. And these apartments surrounded the merry-go-round because you had to go high up for the carousel. And there were these wooden windows that would open, so you could look down onto the merry-go-round as it would go around. And at night, I mean, you had to talk in between when it was going around, because the music goes, and then it stops, and then you can talk, and then it goes and goes and goes and goes, and then you can stop and talk.
Exactly.
The other thing that happens in the morning is when it's starting, well, it's very quiet in the morning compared to how noisy it gets at night. It's very, very quiet. And then you hear this cranking. It doesn't just turn on like a light switch. They had to crank it, and you would hear it going, and then it slowly, at the very beginning, goes very slowly. The music goes slowly, it goes around slowly, and then finally it gets up to speed. So it was a great treat to be there then.
My office is in one of those apartments. I've come to know quite a few people who lived up there. One being Paul Sand. I don't know if that name, Paul Sand is a Tony Award winning actor. For me, he looked like Joe Namath. And I remember very distinctly in the 1970s watching television saying, that guy looks like Joe Namath, you know, that funny kind of frumpy guy that's on Mary Tyler Moore and Carol Burnett and Wonder Woman and all these shows, you know, he looks like Joe Namath. And then the woman who lived in the apartment that is now my office, Colleen Creedon, her best friend was John Baez, she's like a legend in Santa Monica, said, I want you to meet Paul Sand sometime. I'm going to bring him in here. And she's talking about Paul Sand. Paul Sanchez is his real name. And you should talk to him. He only lived here a short time, but he tells great stories. And into my office walks Paul Sand, and suddenly my entire childhood flashes before my eyes. I've been watching this guy forever. And I mentioned the Save the Pier play. He directs that play. And he's directed another play that I produced on the merry-go-round, and I've produced a couple of his. He's still around. 93 years old. He's on the, if you've watched the show Palm Royale, that has Carol Burnett in it now. So Paul plays Carol's old boyfriend. He's the guy living on the yacht. So, yeah, that's Paul.
I have to watch it again.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, those apartments. Oh, and you mentioned the band organ. So we actually can get some work done because we don't, the band organ doesn't play very often. Now it's recorded music with volume. So. But it's still that grinding sound when they turn it on to start going around. That's still very real, and it takes a minute for it to get up to speed.
Yeah. We have a question in the back.
What happened to the sewage being dumped out?
That actually ended in the 1920s, and when Santa Monica and other municipalities joined the Hyperion line. So it's still all going out into the ocean.
Yeah.
But just not from the pier anymore. Ironically, the Santa Monica Pier, the day before it opened to the public, which was what again?
9/9.
Some fishermen snuck out to the end of the pier and had such a successful day that they declared the Santa Monica Pier as the best fishing spot in all of Santa Monica Bay the day before they opened a sewer pier.
Smart. We have a question here, Carmel.
Yeah, I was thinking about the aquarium that
Yes.
every once in a while I would take my son to. How long has that been there?
That has been there since the 1990s. It's like unfortunately the best kept secret in Los Angeles, I think. It was originally opened by UCLA, and they operated it for about 5 years, and then Hill of Bay took over the lease down there. And there's been always talk and dreams about bringing them up to the top of the pier and making it a bigger and more popular attraction.
Was it in the same area that I think you had mentioned that some of the lifeguards had brought up some kind of little.
No, that was in the original aquarium that the lifeguards operated was in the La Monica Ballroom where Pacific Park is today. Yeah, are you familiar with the Hill of Bay Aquarium at all? Anybody else?
Yeah.
So it's underneath the pier, right at the beginning, almost directly underneath the merry-go-round building. And so it's easy to not find.
Was the roller rink near here or POP?
The roller rink, the two different times there was a roller rink inside the La Monica Ballroom.
Oh, my friends and I thought that was astounding, because you
Yeah.
had really tough people come for the roller rink, mesmerized.
Inside in very short periods, the roller rink existed, and also inside during one of the times that it was a roller rink, Santa Monica was moving their city hall from Santa Monica Boulevard to the location it is now on Main Street and Olympic, and they needed a temporary location for the jail. And so the ballroom, while it's a roller rink, was also a jail, and there were actually 2 jail breaks during that time. It wasn't meant to be a jail.
Did they escape on roller skates?
There's a photograph in the book and an article in the Santa Monica Evening Outlook that both escapees were caught right away, but one was interviewed and told the entire story of how he broke out, and they have pictures of him talking to the police and pointing to certain great panic.
Okay, we'll take one more question.
How do you see the pier developing throughout the next several decades?
Work
That's,
question.
definitely a work question. Ultimately, we will see that aquarium move up top somehow, but it's not an easy process. The Coastal Commission limits how much development you can have, so it's not like we can build a new facility without a lot of work with the Coastal Commission, and that's gonna take a long time. But everybody recognizes the need and the value of putting that educational facility up on top of the pier. Pacific Park will grow, it has to grow, it has not significantly changed since 1996. Yes, the Ferris wheels, it's a second Ferris wheel. Yes, some new rides get replaced, and now they're gonna be opening a climbing structure, and I don't know if you just read that they have new ownership, but that's really just one investment group buying out another, and you see all these headlines about changes, but the park, in order for it to survive, it's gonna have to grow, so that'll come into the parking lot a little bit. But again, Coastal Commission, any development, and then if there's anything significant, we can't add to the pier, to its surface in any way, unless it goes not only to the Coastal Commission, but then to the ballot. And is that what the people really want? Is that what they want their tax dollars to go into? So, there's not a lot of change that can really happen to it. And I think that's not such a bad thing. The pier, it's gone through a lot of changes since 1909, but the pier today, in most people's memories, is not much different than it was when they were younger and what they became fond of. And I think that's one of the most important parts of the pier that makes it the icon that it is today.
Can you still fish off the end?
You can still fish off the end, you don't even need a license.
So that's a recent photo.
This is a recent photo.
And that's the cover of the book.
That is the cover.
We'll use that as the segue to close. How's that? So if you haven't been to Santa Monica Pier, you need to go. I've even been there, and I'm from San Francisco. And if you haven't had a chance to check out the book, you need to do that. It's in the back. It's from Angel City Press. Elliot at the back there will show you a copy of the book, and Jim will even sign it for you if you're interested in getting a copy of Santa Monica Pier, America's Last Great Pleasure Pier. So let's give a big round of applause for our speakers. And a big thank you to Angel City Press, our presenting program partner, and to you for attending this book club program. Thanks for being here. We hope you'll join us for another book club program Monday evening. We have a virtual program coming up. Please join us for that. You can find out more about that online at bccbooks.org/programs. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.